CFB Paint back again, Steve, on a solo episode today. We're letting Corey go, like we mentioned last episode. New addition to the family. Congratulations to them. And it's just me, and what a weekend it was as far as college football goes. We'll cover some of the highlights, and talk through some of the ramifications of this last week. But stream of consciousness here from Steve. So bear with me as I give you my thoughts, and they're half organized and half not. But I guess the lead story is a couple of upsets that I don't think many people saw coming, primarily being Florida losing to USF at home in the swamp, and then Arizona State taking their show on the road to Starkville, Mississippi, not able to come home to bring the win back to Arizona. The Cowbells got them. So, we'll talk through those games. We'll talk through a couple others. Oklahoma, Michigan. That game, well, maybe I'll start with that one. That game kind of went the way I thought it would. True freshman quarterback starting on the road versus a Brent Venables defense. You're going to need a lot of support from your defense, from your special teams, and especially needing help out wide. I don't feel like you got much of those. The defense was okay. It wasn't, the Michigan defense of the last 2 or 3 years. I feel like it's taken a little bit of a step back. John Mateer looked really in control. That game never really felt close after Oklahoma had a 2-touchdown lead. It just seemed like even the times where Michigan brought it within a score, it just never really felt like they were really going to put together enough stops combined with enough offense, really outside of that big 75-yard touchdown run right at the start of the second half. The offense was pretty much non-existent, so tip your cap to Oklahoma. The offense looks good. It looks like it looked good enough, right? Let's put it that way. The defense looked excellent. Made a true freshman quarterback who has a lot of potential look like a true freshman quarterback that has a lot of potential but isn't there yet. So did what they needed to do defensively, and offensively did enough. John Mateer, again, looked pretty strong. I watched that game kind of sporadically. The reason that Corey's out, we were also able to go visit them and the new little one in the hospital. So that game was on at the time. So I maybe didn't have like full attention on the game. But nonetheless, an impressive win for Oklahoma. They're going to need that confidence going into the rest of their schedule, which is pretty challenging. And I think that the team still needs to continue to develop. Jaron Kanek, I think is how you pronounce the last name. Looks good at tight end. I know that he initially started off on the defensive side of the ball. He's a fun watch. So that's a fun little playmaker in the Oklahoma offense. I think they still need a little bit more help on the outside. Not help. I think they need some of those wide receivers that they brought in to continue to produce. Be interesting to see how they can spin that forward. For Michigan, I see Michigan as maybe a 7-5, 8-4 type team. Maybe if something clicks, I still think that their real deficiency is wide receivers. Giving, especially with a freshman quarterback, you really need some wide receivers to separate and make the window really easy for him to see pretty clearly. My first or second read is open because they're able to separate from defensive backs. Didn't get a whole lot of that against Oklahoma. Again, that's a really good defense you played against, but spinning it forward, Michigan's going to be in some dogfights, and so they're going to need points, and they're going to need the defense to be able to hold teams down a little bit better than they did in Norman this past weekend. Let's go to USF in Florida. Wow. Surprising game in a couple of ways. Surprising, number one, in the result, of course. Alex Golesh has been one of those coaches that I've always had my eye on. I think for longtime listeners of the pod, in our win totals draft last year, I drafted USF because I thought they play Alabama and they play Miami. And I was like, Alex Golesh will have a game plan ready for one of those, and he'll jump up and probably bite one of them. And it looked like it was the Bama game. I think, again, they played that game super, super close until about 5 minutes left in regulation. And then the wheels came off for them. I think they turned the ball over twice, and Alabama made the score look a whole lot more impressive than the game really was. But Alex Golesh can game plan. I like the pieces that he's got there. Most of that team is homegrown talent with it sprinkled in with a few transfers. So I think he's navigated the current roster building dynamics as well as any coach has. What's most surprising to me is that, again, he can scheme it up and score points. They didn't score that many points, and neither did Florida. They sort of turned the game into kind of a rock fight where, an 18-16 victory is your final result. Florida did have a couple of opportunities to score. They had two different scores called back because of penalties. On my view, both of those penalties seemed correct, and in one case, one of the penalties was sort of like a direct driver of that score. Like there's a hold right on the edge that sprung. I'm going to forget who it was that sprung the play loose. Essentially, I'm going to forget who it was. I can't even remember. I think it might have been on a reverse. So I think it was a wide receiver on like an end around. And goes around the corner, and there's a pretty obvious hold that would have potentially, at the very least, would have turned him in back into the heart of the defense. So probably preventing a score, but maybe still a good chunk gain. But DJ Lagway just looked pretty bad is kind of my takeaway. There was some really missed throws, and I wonder if they thought that they could be a little bit more conservative with their offensive game planning in attempts to try and hide certain things, especially with kind of their upcoming schedule. They're at LSU this week and then at Miami the next week. So some important games coming up. And if you can keep some of maybe the tricks up your sleeve from being really shown earlier on and putting that on tape for opponents to prepare for, maybe that's what they were trying to do. They thought they maybe could get away with it, and it bit them. I was just surprised. If you were to tell me last week that South Florida is going to win that game, my guess would have been they get into a shootout with UF. They turn the game into basketball on grass, and they're able to just scheme a couple of secondary busts. Again, Alex Golesh kind of comes from the coaching tree of Josh Heupel, spread them really, really wide, and basically force the defense to declare what they're doing to prevent the outside pass versus lining up to defend the run. And then from there, you're able to get some advantageous numbers either in the pass game or in the run game. Byron Brown is a much better runner than he is a thrower at this point in his career, and probably likely will be going forward. But he made plays when he had to. They extended some drives, and again, wasn't pretty, but they got the win. And it's interesting to see where Florida goes from here, because like I said, it doesn't get easier. You're at LSU, who's looked really strong throughout the season. Again, a good win on the road at Clemson. Maybe a little bit of a letdown in terms of the style points against. Oh goodness, who did they even play this last week? Let me find who that was. Oh, Louisiana Tech. Okay, so yeah, a little bit of a letdown in terms of the final score, but it wasn't. The outcome was really never in question there. Again, they were up 10 at half, up 17 going into the fourth quarter. Not a super impressive outing, but again, I think you could probably say the same things about LSU that I did about Florida with regard to maybe peeking ahead one week to a pretty important matchup in the SEC in terms of getting an early win in the conference record. So we'll see how that one goes. Again, that is in Baton Rouge next week. Yeah, maybe not all as well in Gainesville, Florida. We'll have to see. I know that they're frustrated with the kind of inexplicable losses that they've had basically every year under Billy Napier. They've had one or two where there's not a really good explanation for it. So USF likely is that loss this year, but the rest of their schedule does not let up. So you'll have to see how that one goes. Tackle a couple of others. Mississippi State, Arizona State, of course, is the other big upset. I really think this one boils down to a couple of things pretty simply. Arizona State struggled to throw the football. They, I think, had, goodness, I'm going to get the game right in front of me. Yeah, so Arizona State loses 24-20, down 17-0 at one point in the first half, kick a late field goal to get on the board just before halftime. When we look at kind of like how the teams performed, Sam Leavitt, 10 of 22 with 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. That is 3.6 yards per pass. Oh, I don't even know if I said how many yards, for 82 yards. So 3.6 yards per attempt. That is not good at all. The first 2 drives, he missed 2 different wide open receivers that could have extended drives and could have potentially got the game off on a better foot. And the challenge is that once you're down 17-0, you kind of have to start throwing the football more than you'd probably like to. And on the game, they averaged 4.9 yards per attempt running the football, 51 rushing attempts, 251 yards. But late in the game, as they had to kind of score and try not to bleed out all the clocks, so they had opportunities to continue to win the game, more and more passing, really struggled on third down, 3 of 14. That'll just about do it. Mississippi State, again, played a great game. They played a great game for what they had to do. Blake Shapen was exactly what I expected to be, a guy that's not going to make a ton of mistakes. I don't think he made a ton of like really dynamic plays other than the really deep pass at the end. Some uncharacteristic busts by the Sun Devil defense was a bit disappointing. I think that the Sun Devils can still right the ship. It's one bad game, and it's in a tough-to-play environment. And you even made the comeback in the second half to take a lead with a minute and a half left. I know people are going to point to that final touchdown. That's going to be the big, that's going to be the major one that everyone kind of focuses on. To me, this game was primarily lost in that first half where you got behind so dramatically and weren't able to extend drives. And a lot of that had to do with Sam Leavitt just having kind of an inaccurate day. And that's atypical for him. So to me, I would take some faith in thinking that's probably not likely to repeat itself, but certainly something to keep in mind. The SEC with kind of a mixed bag in terms of the results this last week, where you had a really good upset from one of your, what everyone would assume is kind of the lower tier in Mississippi State that went 2-10 last year for your reference, and then Florida being ranked 13 and then losing to an unranked USF. USF with 2 ranked wins on the year so far. Well, let's pay attention. Let's keep an eye on the Bulls going forward. I think that there's an opportunity for them to be the G5 representative in the playoff, but there's a lot of football to be played still. A couple of others that we'll touch on, just because I know that there's certain teams that our kind of core listeners are plugged into. Oregon 69, Oklahoma State 3. I think we're probably at the end of the road for Mike Gundy. It's been a great run. The landscape of college football has changed, and like Brad Pitt says in Moneyball, adapt or die. And I think some people are adapting better than others, and maybe that's one that there needs to be a little bit more adapting. And that's not just the coach, but maybe larger elements of that program. And so we'll see where they go from there. Who knows? Oregon really looks really impressive, running the football, throwing the football. They look like a pretty complete team. I'm excited to see them in a couple of weeks line it up with Penn State. That's the real test. The first couple of games have been kind of the results that I've expected, but the magnitude of those victories has been pretty impressive. So we'll see what that one looks like going forward as well. Let's talk through a few other quick, just rapid fire 1 or 2 sentences on a few different games that I happen to get some eyes on. Illinois Duke, you turn the ball over 5 times, you're going to lose. That was a really close game. It snowballed in Duke. I think that they're a better team than they showed in the back half of that game. Congrats to the Illini, came away with a big victory. Let's see, Michigan, Oklahoma, we touched on that. Oh, Iowa State. oof, that feels, if you're a Hawkeye fan, that you just watched the same movie over again with that the 54-yard field goal to beat you 2 years in a row. Yikes. Kyle Conradi, I hope I'm saying that right. Man, a legend in Ames, Iowa at this point. Has to be. He won him 2 Cy-Hawk trophies in a row with really clutch kicks. Yeah, and Rocco Becht is a wizard. I would love to see him. Again, I'm not wish casting this, but like last year, I didn't have a full appreciation for how good the wide receivers he had around him were. He's a really special talent in just the ability to avoid when it looks like the defense has him dead to rights. He is very slippery, very tough to tackle. They're going to be a problem. They look like they're going to be one of that group of maybe 4 or 5 teams that can win the Big 12. I'm going to quickly scroll through a couple of others and see if there's anything else that I wanted to tackle. That might be just about it. Yeah, I guess one other, like I know that there's, as far as our listeners, there's some Washington Huskies fans, and I still just don't know what the Washington Huskies are because they've played 2 very much overmatched opponents, and they've made them look overmatched, so they've met expectations, but the rubber really meets the road for Washington in a couple of weeks. They are at Washington State. I guess they're off this weekend, and then at Washington State. With Washington State's program being where it is and the defections that they've seen from the transfer portal and from their own coaching staff, I expect them to roll in that game. They host Ohio State the following week, and that will be an interesting one to see how close they can keep that game. Again, I don't expect them to win that game, but that will be one where it's a good data point for us to understand exactly what Washington is, and then the next few weeks when they're at Maryland, hosting Rutgers, and at Michigan, and then facing Illinois. I think that's where we'll kind of get a better sense of who Washington is. But they're an exciting one. Again, they play a fun brand of football with Damon Williams and some of the playmakers that they have. Jonah Coleman's obviously fun. Denzel Boston has made a couple of highlight reel catches, maybe not quite had the big numbers that we're expecting, but between Jonah Coleman, Damon Williams, and Adam Muhammad, they can run the football pretty well, and I think that should open up things for the wide receivers. It's just, how does that look against better competition as we go forward? So we'll have to find out. Other results that I wanted, for my BYU crowd, 27-3 versus Stanford. You cover the spread like we expected. It didn't look as physically dominant as I would have liked to have seen it. So that has me a little concerned going forward. I think this next week, you're on a bye, so maybe getting a little bit more kind of a down the field passing attack would be interesting, but also showing the linemen the tape. I think that they feel good about the offensive line, and I would have expected it to, even if Stanford kind of knows what's coming in terms of run, pass, and kind of your more the runs that you've put on tape and kind of what they've typically ran. I would expect them to have had a more physically dominant performance, and they didn't. So maybe it was a bad game. Maybe it's a sign of, hey, the offensive line isn't quite as good as I thought it would be, and as good as many thought it would be going into the season. If it is just an off week, it's a good week to have an off week against an opponent that really can't take advantage of it. We'll see more. I think that ECU game will tell us a lot about the Cougars, especially Bear Bachmeier's first road start. It'll be a hostile environment. It's a cross-country trip. There's a lot to be intrigued about what you'll learn about BYU in that game. Can't think of any other specific results from this past weekend that I really felt the need to cover. So yeah, maybe we spin it forward to week 3, and we'll talk through just a handful of games. A couple of them early on in the slate that are interesting just to see. Again, we're getting our third data point on teams. Third. So the sample size is still pretty small. Clemson at Georgia Tech is fascinating to me. That Clemson opened as a big favorite. That's closed down quite a bit. How much of that is maybe an overreaction to them struggling versus Troy this past weekend remains to be seen. I'm really interested to see how Clemson bounces back, because this is not the opponent that you can say, okay, this is a palate cleanser where we had a bad week and then we can kind of right the ship with, an easy victory. If anything, many thought that would be Troy this past weekend after a really tough loss against LSU, a really good opponent at home. So we'll have to see what that looks like for the Tigers. I think Georgia Tech will keep it close. I think that they will play ball control. That's kind of what they do. They run the ball. They're really physical. So putting that offensive line up against what is a pretty good defensive front from Clemson, but maybe hasn't been quite as dominant as we'd expected, especially against the run. I think is maybe an opportunity for them to maybe expose some weaknesses in Clemson's offensive front. So I'm interested to see how that one goes. I'm seeing right now the total's at 58.5. I got the under on that. I don't think there's going to be nearly that many points in that game. Let me actually double check and make sure I'm looking at the correct. I'll maybe double check. Hang on just a second here. Let's see if I got the right. Okay, 53.5 is now. Sorry, I don't know if I had that from earlier or if it just hadn't refreshed correctly. Yeah, Clemson currently favored -3.5 on the road at Georgia Tech with a total of 53.5. Maybe I think I lean under in terms of the total points. I see this as kind of a defensive slugfest. Georgia Tech possessing the football, trying to shorten the game. Clemson's offense has kind of struggled over the last two games, and Cade Klubnik specifically has struggled. So I like what Georgia Tech has done defensively thus far. Again, maybe not necessarily the challenge that Clemson can potentially represent from a talent perspective, but I think that will be sort of a defensive struggle, grind the ball out, run the football, and that if it plays out that way, that plays into Georgia Tech's hands and will probably give them a chance to win the game toward the end with a close score and being able to make a play or two at the end that decide it. So we'll see how that one goes. I'm interested to see what comes of that. Also in that noon slate, Wisconsin travels to visit Alabama. Which Alabama are we going to see? Are we going to see the one that was out-physicaled basically from start to finish of the game versus Florida State? Was that the anomaly, and then the 73-0 win over Louisiana Monroe? Is that the Bama that we know? And again, that's an overmatched opponent, so it's hard to read too far into that, except the number is quite staggering. So I'm not a believer in Wisconsin this year. So if Bama wins by any less than, again, the spread right now is 20.5. I think if they don't cover, again, depending on the circumstances, might change things. But if I'm an Alabama fan and we win this game by 13, I'm sweating bullets about what's to come for the rest of the year. So let's that's another one to look through and see what does that third data point tell us about this team. Is it more like the first game that we saw them, or are they more like the second? And have they kind of put that Florida State game behind them? Georgia versus Tennessee. Does anyone know what either of these teams are? I don't. I feel like Georgia's been on ice essentially with cruising to a victory against Marshall, and then kind of a weird game where there were, I think, multiple lightning delays, and they got the win versus, oh goodness, I'm going to forget who they played this last week, Austin Peay, but 28-6 is not exactly, doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. Tennessee 2-0, demolished East Tennessee State this last week, but also looked pretty good against Syracuse. But I don't really think Syracuse is much to write home about this year. So this game is just going to be interesting. It's one of those games where it's a little disappointing having a 12-team playoff where I don't feel like this game has stakes so much as it's going to be just information for us to keep in mind going forward. So, it is what it is. Right now, I think the line is 3.5 in favor of Georgia, and that's on the road. That's at Neyland Stadium in Knoxville. I lean Georgia to cover that, but I really don't know what either of these two teams are. I think the defenses are much better than both of the offenses, so we'll see if that plays out the way I expect it to. And it really kind of boils down to which QB is able to have some success versus the defenses. I think both will probably struggle to run the football. Again, I'm not a professional at this, but that's the way I see that one playing out. A couple of other matchups that I wanted to just touch on real quick. Oh, Pittsburgh and West Virginia, the backyard brawl. Love that it's back. Pitt's going to win this game. West Virginia just lost to Ohio. So that's the way I see that. I see Pittsburgh covering the spread. I think it's currently a 5-point spread. Six and a half, excuse me. I must have been looking at the wrong one. So Pitt, 6.5 point favorites on the road in Morgantown. I don't think that matters. I think that they're going to get the win. You're going to get a ruckus environment. It's a rivalry game. I just think West Virginia needs a year or two under Rich Rod to kind of get the correct system or players in place for his system. So we'll see what that looks like. I just think that West Virginia needs a year to kind of get their feet underneath them. South Florida at Miami. Can South Florida do it 3 times? I really struggle to see it against this Miami team. Miami has looked really sharp. Both lines of scrimmage look very physically imposing. I think they kind of put it in cruise control this last week against Bethune-Cookman pretty early in that game. South Florida, I like USF. I think that they'll be as confident as they could possibly be. They've showed up and won in really difficult environments. I think they'll probably get one again this weekend with their upset win over Florida this past weekend. I kind of like that these 3 teams play a round robin. So that's how it should be with Miami, Florida, and Florida State every year, which we do get that this year, but not always. But I kind of enjoy the round robins to see if there are, does everyone split the series, or is there kind of a team that establishes themselves as clearly better than both? I suspect that to be Miami this year. Offensive line looks good. Defensive line looks really good. So I think South Florida will really struggle with pressure and with the ability to run the football. I got Miami covering the 17.5. I think that they're going to cover that spread. I think that they look really sharp. I think that they're on their way to a pretty special season. And also some of their competition around them has looked maybe not as good. I know Florida State's looked okay. I still am kind of in wait and see mode with FSU. And I guess maybe that takes me to a broader point of we have 2 data points. Anyone that's saying that, this team is done for and totally cooked is probably being hyperbolic. And anyone that thinks, this team is absolutely a shoo-in for the national championship, I think is also. So I'm doing my best to not overreact to what are 2 data points in a 12-game season. But there's some trends that we've seen across some. And so Miami is one that I think is trending up. I'm surprised, frankly. I thought coming into this year, you lost your starting quarterback, most of your receiving production. And so far, I think they look better. And part of that is I think they just are more competent defensively. So new defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman's done a really good job. I think some of the new pieces they brought in specifically in the secondary have held up quite well. So Miami looks like a force to be reckoned with in the ACC, and the rest of the ACC doesn't look very good. If their biggest competition is FSU, I think that they're going to do great things. I think they can start to pencil themselves into a trip to the ACC championship game, and Miami can maybe start dreaming about putting those demons to bed. The fact that they have not won an ACC conference championship since joining in 2004. Other key, we'll touch on this one real quick. Ole Miss and Arkansas playing in the Grove in Oxford. Arkansas has had a nice start to the season. It's been kind of this is good for Sam Pittman and the boys, as they've won 2 overmatched opponents, Alabama A&M and Arkansas State. I think they come back to reality this next week, where Ole Miss is hosting them. Again, Ole Miss had a close game against Kentucky. Mark Stoops always has something ready for Ole Miss and ready for Lane Kiffin's offense. And I just think that that's one of those styles that Ole Miss struggles against. Arkansas probably wants to turn this into a track meet and just play a lot of offense. I think Ole Miss is comfortable in a game like that. I see Ole Miss winning. I don't know pick on the number there, but I think Ole Miss is going to be able to defend home turf, and Arkansas has, had a good start to the season, but it's been against competition that maybe is not quite on the same level as meeting a conference foe. So that one in the books. Let's talk about Florida and LSU. I think Florida, you've got to be really concerned with how the offense performed this last week, especially going into Baton Rouge. Loud environment. It's going to be tough to communicate on the field. So if LSU's throwing different looks at you and Blake Baker is one to throw some unique looks and bring pressures from different areas, the spread's 9.5. I think it could be higher. I like LSU to win. I like LSU to probably cover that spread. Yeah, I think this last week was maybe just a little bit of a hangover week for both teams. So it'll be interesting to see if both teams were kind of in the lab preparing for this game. Well, Florida, can you make the USF loss worth it if you win on the road at LSU? And then LSU, can you just hold serve, just win at home against a difficult opponent, but maybe one that has a few more flaws than we expected heading into the season. Florida's offensive line has struggled, and I thought that would be a strength of the team. Going into a ruckus environment, it's important that they're communicating, that they're physically holding up, and LSU's front four is maybe not my favorite in college football, so there's maybe opportunity for that. We'll have to see. The other primetime game, Texas A&M, Notre Dame. A&M's another one of those teams where I don't really know what to make of them because they haven't really played anyone that has that I really kind of hold in particularly high esteem. UTSA and Utah State. No disrespect to them, just different levels of football, right? And so Notre Dame played well against Miami, but again, like they lost the game. It really wasn't as close as maybe the score indicated that Notre Dame had to kind of make it interesting late. We'll see. They're at home. It's their home opener. It's I expect a raucous environment, as raucous of an environment as it gets. And I wouldn't give Notre Dame's home field advantage like one of it's you're not going into Neyland Stadium. You're not going into Death Valley in Baton Rouge or anything like that. So it's not quite. I don't consider it the same level of raucous environment or even the 12th man for A&M. So I've got Notre Dame winning that. To me, it's their ability to run the football. I am interested to see how well they can stop the run. That defensive line looked overmatched a little bit against Miami, but I don't know if A&M's offensive line is quite to that same level. So if they can stop the run and they can run the football themselves, I'm interested to see Jeremiah Love and how many touches he gets, because we talked about sort of the lack of involvement he had in the offense against Miami in week 1. So interested to see if they change that, if any adjustments are made by the offensive coaching staff there at Notre Dame. I guess maybe we'll touch on this one real quick. Duke and Tulane. Fascinating that Tulane is now favored in this game. For those who maybe are not paying as close attention, Darian Mensah, the Duke quarterback, transferred to Duke from Tulane. Tulane, of course, has their own transfer quarterback in Jake Retzlaff from BYU. But yes, Darian Mensah returning to New Orleans. And now the home team, his former team, is now favored against them. I think some of that might be an overreaction to the result that they got against Illinois this past week, where they turned the ball over 5 times, 4 by way of fumble. So if you're able to preach ball security a little bit better and just being a little bit more crisp when it comes to holding onto the football, protecting it through contact, and then again some of that luck around when a fumble's forced, whoever's around it, the players around it who recovers it. So there's some variability and some luck involved in that. So I think you can clean some of that up. I do think Duke's a pretty good team. I think Tulane is a pretty good team, but I do think they're sort of still gelling. Jake Retzlaff didn't show up at Tulane until fall camp. So, he's played well so far, but again, Manny Diaz, I think, is a good defensive coordinator. Will probably cause some confusion amongst the front or the offensive line of Tulane in terms of where pressures might be coming. Is Retzlaff going to be able to recognize that, communicate the appropriate changes, and kind of keep them within within what they do offensively to keep the chains moving? Fascinated to watch that game. I don't necessarily have a pick for it, but I do expect a close game. And it's just, if you're a storylines kind of person, and I usually am, it's always fun to see a team that's motivated to hand someone a loss. And I think you're going to see that on a couple of these. I think that's pretty much all I've got for this go around. As far as picks, I kind of touched on a couple of those, but I'll go ahead and hand out a couple of others. The first ones that I've got, so Oregon minus 27.5 at Northwestern. I think the reason the number is so low is because they're playing this on the lake. There's winds, but Oregon's been able to run the football quite well. They've impressed me. I think even if they run the football and try and shorten the game, I think they probably are still able to cover this, mostly because I don't see Northwestern scoring many points at all. So I think Oregon's defense is able to do what it's been able to do. I think they can keep it simple on offense and continue to have success. So give me Oregon to cover that 27.5. I am going to take, let's see, a couple of others here. Let me scroll through these and find them. Yeah, like I mentioned, I think I like Georgia. I'm going to go ahead and make it an official pick. I like Georgia minus 3.5 at Tennessee. I feel like just the talent on Georgia is good. I know it's a road game. That opened at 6.5. It's been bet down to 3.5. I think there's value on that side of it now. Pittsburgh, I think they cover against West Virginia, so they cover the 6.5. Again, going into a hostile environment, but how hostile is it if you have some early success and the team has really struggled? Does that hostile environment become hostile toward the home team? Possibly. A couple of others that I wanted to take a swing at. Miami, I've got them covering against South Florida. I know South Florida can potentially muck up this game like they did against Florida. I think that put Miami on notice. I think the offensive and defensive lines of Miami are both better than the ones that you saw at Florida, so I think they'll be able to stop the run and establish the run much better. My only concern there is that if Miami gets out to like a 3 or 4 touchdown lead, do they just try and shorten the game? And is there a potential that South Florida scores a late touchdown to end up covering the spread? That would be my concern. So keep that in mind, but I've got Miami covering that game as well. I think that might be all for as far as like the official picks that I'm going to go and submit this go around. To recap, last week I said Mississippi State plus 7 versus ASU. That was correct. USC to cover the 27.5 versus Georgia Southern. That was correct. BYU minus 18.5 for Stanford. That was correct. Memphis minus 14 versus Georgia State. That was correct. Navy did not cover the 27.5 versus UAB. They won by 14. Oregon did cover the spread again, 69-3 versus Oklahoma State. Oklahoma covered the 5.5. I missed on Kansas covering the 6, missed on the UCLA UNLV over. So on the year, I'm 7-3 versus the spread or against the total. 7-3, I'll take that. There's going to be a regression to the mean. Maybe this is the week. We'll have to see. Looking forward to it. Thanks for kind of putting up with me as I've rambled here for roughly 40 minutes. But appreciate it as always. Give us a like, a share, and subscribe. And if there's things that we're not touching on that you'd like to hear about, let us know in the comments. Let us know. CFBpaint@gmail. So hit us up there as well. Thanks. Looking forward to it. And we'll see you on our next episode.